Coming up on Mayo Clinic Q&A.
My goal in life is to make new stuff for patients, to make the treatment less burdensome, and to make their lives better. And so if we really want to make new drugs, new devices, new treatments, we all have to work together.
That collaboration often comes by working with patient advocacy groups. The results can lead to new advancements and treatments for patients.
I mean, there's no one that cares more than the patient, right? Than the patient's family. And so to bring the patients together, allow them to work together, and then let us as the researchers and the doctors serve them is a really powerful force.
Welcome everyone to the Mayo Clinic Q&A podcast. I'm Dee Dee Steepens, sitting in for Dr. Helena Gazelka. Patient advocacy and support organizations play an important role for patients suffering with diseases or conditions. The goal of these groups is to connect with others who may be in similar situations and to help locate resources and manage or treat their condition. But patients aren't the only ones who benefit from these connections. Physicians and researchers can benefit too from getting involved. Here to discuss is Mayo Clinic orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Noelle Larson. Dr. Larson, welcome to the program. Thanks so much for joining us.
Really a pleasure to be here with you this morning, Dee Dee.
So tell me, how did you start becoming more involved with groups for patients and their families?
From my standpoint, taking care of patients is my passion. So it really comes naturally to be interested and involved in my patients' lives. My primary clinical and research focus is scoliosis. So I see a lot of young teenagers, primarily girls, and their parents, and really feel for them as they go through their walk in life. Oftentimes for non-operative management of scoliosis, children are being asked to wear a brace to school, which is very difficult, particularly for a young teenage lady. And so I think my first introduction was really getting involved with Curvy Girls Scoliosis Support Group, which is a state-based and national organization, actually global organization, which helps children with scoliosis develop supportive strategies as far as how to wear a brace, how to wear clothes that fits over a brace, how to prepare for surgery, how to go through the recovery following surgery. And I saw that a lot of my patients were benefiting from these networks. So that was kind of the first group that I've become involved with. I had the pleasure of going to their national meeting a couple of years ago prior to COVID, and spent the weekend with over 100 lovely young ladies and their mothers at a hotel in Long Island, and really got a chance to listen to your patients. So often our encounter in clinic is quite short. It's a 10, 15-minute encounter, and you don't get a sense of the impact of what our treatment has on that child's overall life and well-being. So it was really a change in my practice and my change of how I view each patient encounter, to spend a couple of days on site with families and children affected by scoliosis.
Well, that's wonderful. Would you say, is it common to have Mayo MD faculty, such as yourself, attending these organization meetings for patients and their families?
I think it's becoming increasingly common, and I would be a huge advocate for it. I'd recommend it to my colleagues, and then I'd recommend patients if you're struggling with a condition and you only get to see your physician once or twice a year, yet you're having challenges in your own life. That ability to reach out, and I think a lot of that reaching out is now occurring through social media and through internet and through online connections. I mean, there's a huge ability now to make contact with others, and that gives power and education and networking to the families. And I think physicians, if we're not involved, then that's a real shame, because again, these patients know more about their condition and living with their condition than we do at some level.
Oh, absolutely. And you touched on it a little bit, but can you speak more about how patients and their families benefit from these groups?
I think there's a lot of word of mouth happening nowadays, where new treatments arise. And really the poster child for all of this is a group that I'm not particularly involved with at the moment, but I admire, and it's Cure SMA. So spinal muscular atrophy is a relatively common condition that can be life-threatening and affects children. And there was a parent who had a child with spinal muscular atrophy and wished to do research. So they set up a large research fund and actually funded University of Massachusetts and some other partners, and they actually developed a drug that cures SMA. So spinal muscular atrophy, now if the children get the drug prior to 1 year of age, the children are now walking, they're not needing ventilators, they're up living a much more normal life because of this patient organization that achieved the dedicated funding that then was transferred into a pharmaceutical product. So, I mean, that really is the gold standard, right? And I think there hadn't, there's no one that cares more than the patient, right? There's no more that cares more than the patient and the patient's family. And so to bring the patients together, allow them to work together, and then let us as the researchers and the doctors serve them is a really powerful force. So I'm hoping we'll see those same kind of developments for scoliosis. I would love a medical cure for scoliosis where we don't have to put children in a hard plastic brace and we don't have to do surgery on their spines. So I think we should do it.
I agree. That sounds incredible. Talk a little bit more about how the medical community benefits from these organizations.
I think at the end of the day, we want to see fast, safe innovation. And so from our standpoint, if we have patient organizations and patient networks to work with, we can meet more patients who might be interested in enrolling in a study. When we have patients that are enrolled in a study, again, if they're invested and interested, or better yet, their support group is funding the study, they're going to do their best to make the best possible data that will then help the FDA decide whether or not to approve that treatment, which will then help insurance companies decide whether or not they're going to approve it. So again, about 5 years ago, I decided I'd published enough papers. I got my little professorship. I ticked all the boxes, and really my goal in life is to make new stuff for patients, to make the treatment less burdensome, and to make their lives better. And so if we really want to make new drugs, new devices, new treatments, we all have to work together. Because what I think it might be a good idea, a patient might say, no way, I will never wear a brace that looks like that. I would never want to go through a surgery that involved that. So that partnership between the families and the patients and the researchers and the doctors all working together is really critical. Same thing for an engineer. An engineer might have a great idea for a new spine device, but as a physician, if I come in there and say, well, that means the family has to travel here 4 times a year, and we have to do surgery, 8 times, and I can say, hey, no, that's not feasible. That's not a feasible treatment. Go back to the drawing board. So at the end of the day, any one group alone is not going to make as much progress as if we all can work together and, again, make lives better for kids.
Absolutely. Well said. Can you share any other examples of how these collaborations lead to research discoveries and medical advances?
Well, my main journey over the last 6 years has been non-fusion scoliosis treatment. Fusion surgery has been around for 40 years. It's very predictable. All the pediatric orthopedic spine surgeons, we know how to do the procedure very well. There are 15,000 papers in the published medical literature talking about fusion surgery. But what I started hearing from my patients 5 to 7 years ago was that they don't want a fusion and that they don't want to have rods in their back. And I can, again, have this long discussion with families and say it's very reliable, it's a great solution, but they want to preserve their child's growth and mobility. So there was a procedure that was developed in the US that was not approved by the FDA. So we did a handful of those procedures at Mayo. And at that point, I ethically didn't feel comfortable continuing doing non-fusion scoliosis surgery without a study. So I went and talked to my first handful of patients and I said, hey, would you be willing to be in a study if we're able to get FDA approval for it? So we did a surgeon-sponsored investigational device exemption study at Mayo, and I really have to thank all my patients for being willing to come and do the follow-up and do the patient-reported outcomes. And it was really an outgrowth of hearing from my families that they want an option other than fusion. And then right now we're really kind of at an ethical standpoint because the non-fusion surgeries have a higher failure rate. So there's a higher chance of needing a second surgery with non-fusion. But like in the fusion, you put a rod, right? You put a rod on the kid's back and you pull the spine straight and it's great. And then the non-fusion devices are like a plastic cord. So we have like a plastic cord, where the child's back still bends and moves and twists. But as you'd imagine, the rod it's going to be quite hard to break it, right? But a little plastic cord, this is going to break at some rate. The device is going to fail. And our family is willing to accept that higher failure rate for the cost of motion and growth. So really, as a surgeon, I find that a very hard decision to make. Most surgeons are very conservative. We want to do a procedure that's going to work and the patient doesn't ever have to come back with more problems. Again, this is another threshold in time where we need that feedback from families about what do they value and care about. So right now we're doing a FDA-sponsored study with Studying Scoliosis Straight Foundation. So the first aim of the study was to survey 300 patients and families about their values regarding fusion versus non-fusion surgeries. So we've just completing aim 1 of the study. And then the second aim is actually through the Mayo Knowledge Education Research Unit with Dr. Juan Brito. And basically, we're developing a shared decision aid that doctors can use when they're sitting with their families talking about fusion versus non-fusion, and use that aid to help inform patients. But I'd say for right now, there are these very involved social media groups that are interested in fusion versus non-fusion, and they really would benefit from some of the data. So like tomorrow night, I'm doing with Studying Scoliosis Straight, we're doing a webinar for patients and families with kind of the latest updates on non-fusion scoliosis surgery. And again, trying to work with patient groups so that they have an informed ability to decide what's best for their child.
That's a great example. Thank you for sharing that. And I love a visual aid, so I appreciate I appreciate that. Dr. Larson, are there any recent activities that you've been involved with these organizations and support groups?
This fall, I had an amazing opportunity to go to the Children's Tumor Foundation neurofibromatosis walk. And I actually ended up going to the one in Iowa and also to the one in Minneapolis. And I had a couple of my patients that I had treated with a newer procedure on the shin bone on the tibia. One was age 3, the other is about age 5. And both the little boys were there at the walk, and they were running around together and meeting each other. And one little boy was in a brace, and the other boy, due to our interventions, is now out of the brace. So it was really sweet to see the two of them, share bracing tips and meet their families and see them playing together at this walk. It was really like one of the highlights of my life, I have to say, to see these two children living and playing together. And I think neurofibromatosis is another very common genetic condition, and Children's Tumor Foundation is very active both as far as research, developing research standards. So I sit on a couple of committees where we have patients with neurofibromatosis and PhDs who research neurofibromatosis and clinicians who treat patients with neurofibromatosis, all working together to figure, like, if we do a study, what kind of outcomes should we look at? What's important to families? What makes a difference in their lives? Rather than just me as a doctor, as the orthopedic surgeon, I care about the x-ray. That's our typical study. We care what the x-ray looks like. We don't necessarily wish or know how to study the function, which at the end of the day is what's important, right? The function is important, not the x-ray.
Our thanks to Mayo Clinic orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Noelle Larson, for joining us today. Dr. Larson, thank you so much.
Mayo Clinic Q&A is a production of the Mayo Clinic News Network and is available wherever you get and subscribe to your favorite podcasts. To see a list of all Mayo Clinic podcasts, visit newsnetwork.mayoclinic.org. Then click on podcasts. Thanks for listening, and be well. We hope you'll offer a review of this and other episodes when the option is available. Comments and questions can also be sent to Mayo Clinic News Network at mayo.edu.